Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Alan Smale, talking about Burning Night, the third book in his Apollo Rising alternate history trilogy. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am myself an author of a great many books on a great many topics, both fiction and nonfiction. My most recent fiction book I happen to have right here. It's Fireboy. It's a middle grade, modern day fantasy adventure. This girl that you see on the cover, her entire grade 7 science class vanished mysteriously on a field trip that she didn't go on because of food poisoning. Everybody except for one student and the teacher just disappeared off the bus, which was found overturned, and nobody knows exactly what happened to them. And then all of a sudden, one of the kids who was on that bus, her best friend, Lorenzo, shows up made out of fire, first in a campfire and then in her backyard. And he needs help. And so she has to figure out what happened to him and how to rescue him and the other kids. And she enlists the help of that one girl who was on the bus but doesn't really know what happened, but would really like to. And that's kind of the story. It's called Fireboy. And if you have a young reader, or if you like to read young readers' fiction, I highly recommend it. But then I would, because I'm the author. I'm also a publisher, and in fact, that book came out from my publishing company, Shadowpaw Press. Shadowpaw Press is quite active, and I think I did 20 books last year, which is way too much for one person and the cat. And I've had quite a few this year. I won't mention them all, but I did want to mention this one because I'm talking to a science fiction author today. This is the most recent new science fiction title from Shadowpaw Press. It's called Gods of a New World, and it's fairly timely. It involves trillionaires and AI and how they're trying to not just how they have reshaped the world of the future, in fact, rescued the world of the future from a very bad period of time, but now are trying to take even more power and actually gain control of creation itself. So Gods of a New World by Ryan Melsom. He's an author in Ottawa, and I highly recommend it. So I suggest you check that one out as well. And you can find everything that Shadowpaw Press publishes, which is not just science fiction and fantasy. In fact, my last episode of this podcast, I was talking to Betty Jane Hegarett, whose short fiction collection, literary short fiction collection, Elephants in the Room, I just published. If you go to shadowpawpress.com, you can find everything that I have published. Some books also come out under endlesskybooks.com. That's an imprint of Shadowpaw Press for distribution purposes, but it also offers publishing services and more of the hybrid press model. So if, in fact, you are looking for someone to help you publish a book, you could get me to help you if you go to endlesskybooks.com. And there's hyphens in there, endless-sky-books.com. And the most recent one from that is also one of mine. It's a reprint of Magebane, written under pseudonym Lee Arthur Chane. And Magebane was a standalone fantasy novel originally published in mass market paperback by Daw Books, through whom I published 12 novels so far. And I have the rights back now, so I put it out in a new trade paperback edition. And as I said, it's under pseudonym Lee Arthur Chane, which is the middle names of my older brothers and myself, Jimmy Lee Willett, Dwight Arthur Willett, and Edward Chane Willett. Made a great pseudonym, Lee Arthur Chane. So you might want to check that out. That's also under the Endless Sky Books imprint. So that's where I'll be putting reprints like that going forward. And there's some other stuff, but I'll just leave it at that for now. So let's get on to today's guest, Alan Smale. Now, this is interesting because Alan was on the program once before, so he's one of my, so far there's only been a handful of them, one of my repeat customers, as I said. But I'll read his bio now. Alan Smale recently retired from a long career as a NASA space scientist and data management expert, during which he pursued a second career writing alternate history and hard SF. His novella of a Roman invasion of ancient America, A Clash of Eagles, won the Sidewise Award for alternate history in 2011, and his series of novels set in the same universe, Clash of Eagles in 2015, Eagle in Exile in 2016, and Eagle and Empire 2017, are available through Penguin Random House /Del Rey. His lifetime obsession with human spaceflight then led him to his Apollo Rising series of alternate space race novels set entirely on, around, and beyond the moon during the Cold War. Hot Moon was launched by Kasich SF and Fantasy in July 2022, and the sequels Radiant Sky came out in November 2024, and Burning Night has just come out on November 11th of this year, and so we'll be talking about it, but about the whole trilogy in this podcast. They all conclude the saga of astronaut Vivian Carter and her various NASA crews, covert ops, Air Force colleagues, and Soviet adversaries. So a lot of action, and it's all set on the moon, and as you'll hear, using very, very real technology. Alan has also sold more than 50 pieces of shorter fiction to Asimov, Sunday Morning Transport, and other magazines and original anthologies. You can find him at alansmale.com. And I should mention, on the subject of anthologies, Alan Smale, in fact, has a story in Shapers of Worlds Volume 5, which came out from Shadowpaw Press earlier this year, which features science fiction fantasy authors who were guests of the podcast during its 5th year. I'm now into the, 7th, 8th, I don't know, I lose track. This will be the last one of these, but I kickstarted 5 of them, the Shapers of Worlds anthologies, all published by Shadowpaw Press. And Alan has a story in here, so you want to check that out as well. All right, that's enough blather from me. Let's meet Alan now. So, Alan, welcome back to the Worldshapers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on again.
You're one of my, there have been a few repeat customers, if you want to call them customers, I guess. And I think you're on in 2022, so it's been 3 years. And of course, before it was just audio only. So this is actually the first time we've spoken face to face, even though we talked for an hour, probably the last time we did the podcast. Yeah. And we're talking about the third book in the trilogy that began with what you were talking about when we did the first interview 3 years ago. So we'll talk about that. But let's start at the very beginning and tell us about yourself, where you're from, and what you did. I know you're retired now, so tell us all that.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm Alan Smale. I was born in England, as you can probably tell from the voice, from the accent. I actually grew up mostly in Leeds. Actually, in my house, my mother still lives in the house I grew up in, which is about 5 miles northwest of Leeds, on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales. So I have a British background. I went to Oxford University and studied physics and astrophysics. And then I took a PhD in astrophysics while I was there. I moved to the States when I was 28 years old, and I came across to actually work for NASA on a shuttle mission. And at the time, I was assuming that I would only be staying for 3 years and that I would be going back again. I was so convinced of this that I actually had a visa that expired after 3 years. It was a student visa, in fact. Which had a residence requirement, which said that I actually had to go home at the end of those 3 years. I stayed. One NASA job led to another NASA job. I moved off the shuttle mission and onto working on various satellites and doing astrophysics research with those satellites, and also doing a lot of data management and user support. And I ended up with a 35-year career at NASA, which ended in August of 2023. So I'm now retired, and I'm now a full-time writer. And through a lot of that time, I was writing. I started selling stories back in 1990, short fiction back in 1990. And at that time, I was writing fantasy and horror as well as science fiction. Now I'm pretty much entirely a science fiction writer, and most of my output is alternate history. We spent quite a bit of time in the previous time we were talking about these various books. The Clash of Eagles was the first book series that came out, and that is alternate history in which the Roman Empire survives until the 13th century and is now moving into ancient America at the time when the Mississippian culture is at its height. So hence the Clash, part of the Clash of Eagles series. So that's a culture clash kind of story. It's action adventure with kind of a philosophical underpinning. I think I very much enjoyed writing it. So those books, Clash of Eagles, Eagle in Exile, and Eagle and Empire, those came out from Random House Del Rey. More recently, and also in the alternate history line, we have the books that we'll be talking about today, and that's the Apollo Rising series. The first of them is called Hot Moon, and that came out in July of 2022. And then the two sequels, Radiant Sky, came out last year, and Burning Night, the third one, the concluding volume in the series, is just out now. It came out 2 weeks ago, as of the time we're recording this, on November the 11th, 2025. So now that series is complete, and this is my alternate Apollo series, and it's set entirely on and around and slightly beyond the moon in the period 1979 to 1985.
So what drew you into writing to begin with? I mean, you're a physicist and an astrophysicist, and where did the writing come from? Presumably it came from reading That's how most of us get into this.
Yes, I learned to read early before I went to school, and I did a lot of reading. I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I did a lot of writing as a kid as well. I did some what we would call fanfic now when I was young, kind of alternate Star Trek episodes and things like that. The kids tend to sometimes do, so I'd always had a love of reading and a love of writing. And I did it somewhat in my 20s when I was studying, although I didn't really have much time for writing in those days. And it was really when I started getting into my 30s that I launched back into it and started writing stories and sending them out to magazines and original anthologies in the hopes of getting published, which actually happened fairly quickly. And so I have about 50 short stories now, or pieces of short fiction out in those magazines and anthologies, including Asimov's Science Fiction magazine and Sunday Morning Transport and various things.
And
And I have a short
one of the Shapers of Worlds anthologies.
yes, so Shapers, I have it right here, Shapers of
There you go.
Worlds, Volume 5. I wrote an original story for that, and that came out recently. So yeah, I've always enjoyed writing. I always knew it was a thing I wanted to do. I'll probably keep writing until I can no longer write anymore. Given up the day job now, but I certainly haven't really given up the writing.
So let's talk about the trilogy now. Was it always intended
Okay.
as a trilogy right from the very beginning, or did it grow into a trilogy?
It grew into a trilogy, and this is actually interesting to contrast this with the Clash of Eagles series. In the Clash series, I marketed it as a trilogy. It was bought by Del Rey, by Random House, as a trilogy. And so when we were doing the original developmental edits, we were thinking trilogy-wide. And that's not what happened with the Hot Moon series. With the Hot Moon series, I actually wrote it as a standalone. And so this covers the 1979, 1980 kind of period. It's during the Cold War. The Cold War turns hot on the moon. So we have clunky space battles with ancient Apollo and Soyuz technology. We have bases, both sides have bases on the moon, but things are kind of limited in what they can do. They can't travel very far, all of that kind of thing. So it's very appropriate technology for the times. And so a lot of the intrigue and a lot of the adventure comes out of the fact that it's a hostile environment as much as the fact that the Cold War is not going so great. And well, so when I wrote that book, it ends very tidily. There's obviously not a cliffhanger ending. I marketed it, I sold it to Kasich Science Fiction and Fantasy as a standalone piece, And then the blurbs came in and the reviews came in. They were very good. I got blurbed by Robert J. Sawyer, who I know you know well, and by Larry Niven and people like that. And that just knocked my socks off. And we got some good reviews from Library Journal and all the other places. And my publisher said, you know, we're going to need another one of these, right? And I thought, okay, let me think about that. And it actually wasn't a slam dunk. I didn't say immediately, yes, I want to do that. I really wanted to give that some thought and go over it in my mind and make sure that I could write a second book that I thought was as good as the first book and deserved to be written. And so then I started thinking about how the technologies would improve as we went through the 80s. With the real Apollo program in our universe, we did see some quite striking advances in technology just during the time of the 6 lunar landings that we had. The Apollo lander of Apollo 17 was very different from the lunar module that they used for Apollo 11. They looked very similar, but under the hood, there had been a lot of changes, a lot of improvements in technologies and capabilities. So I thought, how would things have improved over the intervening space when the next book starts? And it's only a couple of years later, but the technology to travel around the moon has grown greatly. The ability to rove for much longer distances that has evolved. So the second book actually sees Vivian Carter at the beginning of a lunar orbit on the ground, if you like. She's actually going around the moon from pole to pole. I'm doing an extensive geological survey that lasts many weeks. So, and that's where that book begins. So yes, I was going through this, and when I reread Hot Moon, it was almost as if I'd subconsciously been putting breadcrumbs down for myself. Because I found when I read it that there were not exactly loose ends, but things that could be things that could be taken further, plot points that could be developed. I liked my characters a lot. I could see areas where my characters could evolve. I have characters both on the American and Russian side, astronauts and cosmonauts. And I could see how all of that would develop. And so Kasich bought the second book. I was actually thinking that if there was a third book, I had an idea in my mind about what that would be. And in my proposal for the second book, I did have a paragraph about what would happen if there was a third. And of course, there was a third book. And so each of the books has its own individual arc. Each one is hopefully a satisfying read in itself. But there is this overall story arc and this overall character development of the American and Soviet characters. And we end in a very different 1985. And so I'm very pleased with the way the books came out. They look great. I know people tell me they're enjoying reading them. And so I'm very happy for the way it worked out. But yes, it was actually intended just to be one book. And so I committed trilogy instead.
On the technology side, I mean, yes, you worked at NASA, but that doesn't mean you were plugged into the technology of the Apollo spacecraft and where you were working. So there must have been a lot of research involved, and
Yep.
it must have continued because, as you said, the technology advanced, and you're moving forward in time with the book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I wanted to get the technology right. It is hard science fiction. I wanted to stay true to the capabilities that they had at the time. Which of course means that orbital mechanics comes in, and some of the orbital stuff, some of the things that happen around the moon are very constrained. I had to do a lot of mathematics to figure out exactly what would be possible under certain conditions and all of that. So I tried to stay true to the technology of the times. The technology is improving during the books, like I said. And for that, I did spend a lot of time looking at what NASA expected to do. NASA did hope to go on, and they had plans for missions beyond Apollo 17. And so they had the Apollo Applications Program, where they were using the same technology for advanced scientific purposes. So I did use some of that in the books, making use of what NASA planned to do. Yeah, I'm an astrophysicist. I do work for NASA. I did meet astronauts in the course of my work, but that isn't really, I wasn't working on the human spaceflight side at all. I've always been interested in the Apollo program. I was a fan of the program when I was a kid growing up. But a lot of the information I needed is all online. NASA has manuals online from those periods, a lot of detailed records, the mission transcripts. When I needed to know how the spacesuits worked, there's a whole 100-page manual online, freely available to the public at nasa.gov, history.nasa.gov maybe. So all of that information is there and available for people. And so I really could dig deep into all of this technical stuff and make sure I was getting my details right.
At the same time, it's a little easy to get bogged down in technical details sometimes. That you have to strike a balance there between what you knew and what forwarded pushed the story forward.
Yes, I wanted to keep the story moving forward, of course, but I wanted it to be realistic. I wanted it to be immersive. I wanted people to think they really were in an Apollo command module or a lunar module or a Soviet Soyuz. And so really it's the background, if you like, it's the setting, it's the surroundings. And I wanted to get that right. So indeed, so when Vivian reaches out to a control, she is actually reaching out to where the control would be in the real Apollo capsule or whatever it is. So it's really getting background right, getting the details right and the jargon right and all of that. So it's not that I'm spending a lot of time explaining what an instrument console looks like, but when they're in the middle of a dodgy landing or when they're changing orbital parameters or whatever it is, when they're doing a burn, a dicey burn or whatever it is, the language is true, what they're going through is true, what they're feeling is true to what the astronauts would have felt. So it's really just a question of making sure that the background is there and that it has a sense of being right and it feels right to the reader because it's as right as I can make it.
Did you talk to astronauts who had actually been, if not on the moon, at least have been in space?
I read a lot of astronaut books. I didn't really interview astronauts for this. I met some when I was working at NASA headquarters mainly. That's where ex-astronauts often tend to go. So I actually had some as colleagues. But no, over on my shelf there, I have a lot of technical books, a lot of technical manuals, and a lot of books by astronauts about what the experience was. And there's some very good books. There's a book called How Apollo Flew to the Moon, which goes into a lot of the technical detail. When you read a lot of Apollo books, it's about the human story, and that's great. But I also needed to get into a lot of the technical details, and so I have manuals, I have all kinds of stuff over there. And reading the transcripts from all of the Apollo missions, you can kind of get an idea about how they reacted when things went wrong, and how they spoke to each other, and all of the other nitty-gritty details of an astronaut's life.
There have been a few stories, sort of the alternate history set in that kind of the space race. I mean, I think obviously the big one is the TV series For All Mankind, but I've also been reading Chris Hadfield's books, and the first one is The Apollo Murder, so it's set on an Apollo spacecraft as well. Why do you think that that time period holds interest for people who write alternate history?
We seem to have this little subgenre going on at the moment, which I think is very interesting, because originally when I was writing the first book, I got a bit of pushback from the major publishers who my agent was applying to. They were saying, this is Apollo, it's old, nobody cares about this, nobody even knows what this is anymore. And this was around about 2017 or so, when we were originally pitching this, when I was originally writing this. And then, of course, things have turned out completely differently. We had the Apollo 50th anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing in 2019. And back when I was writing it, I had this audacious hope that actually it could be published that year and benefit from all the publicity of that. And of course, the book ended up being published quite a lot later than that. And in the meantime, it was actually interesting. I was a little taken aback when I found out about the For All Mankind series, because I was already writing the book at the time and the series hadn't come out. I'd already actually submitted the complete version of Hot Moon, the final first book, to my agent and to my beta readers when the first episode of For All Mankind landed on the TV screens. And I didn't actually watch the show for a while because I didn't want to freak myself out while we were still going through the marketing. And it turns out, of course, that the two books actually have the two things actually have a fairly similar premise. The Soviets do land on the moon. Their moonshot does continue. It does go ahead, and it is successful. And so we are in a future where the space race continues. But I think they're both handled in a very different way. My Apollo books are set entirely on and around the moon, and they have a very limited cast of characters, if you like, because it's just there's obviously a finite number of people on and around the moon at the time, and so it's very intense in a way. Sometimes it's a little claustrophobic because the buildings and the vehicles are claustrophobic, but it's very much set around the action and the adventure and the intrigue, and there's kind of mystery elements there as well as to what really is going on. Whereas For All Mankind, there's the soap opera element. There's a lot of what's going on the Earth. There's a lot of the interactions with families, with politicians, and I enjoyed watching all of that. But I think they're two completely different experiences. I think anybody who watched For All Mankind would probably enjoy my Apollo Rising novels and vice versa. If people like the Apollo Rising series, I'd advise you to go and see the other take on it in For All Mankind. But yes, they're gratifyingly different, I think, which is good. But yeah, and then there's the Chris Hadfield books. There are other writers who've written short fiction recently about the Apollo program. So I think there is a little bit of a resurgence of interest, a little bit of a retro, looking back at the Apollo missions and appreciating them more.
Well, I think, and speaking for myself, I don't know exactly how old you are, but the Apollo landing was on my 10th birthday, July 20th, 1969. And then I couldn't believe it was like, what, 3 years later, and I'm watching the last Apollo mission taking off.
Yes.
And, because I thought that we would be carrying on. I'd read all the stuff about how we're going on. We were going to be on Mars by 1986, I think, was one of the numbers.
That's right. And I fully expected to be a part of that when I was a kid. I don't actually remember this, but my friends assure me, that the friends that I still know from those times assure me that I always said that I was going to work for NASA, which is kind of funny considering I did end up working for NASA, and it wasn't necessarily a straight path that got me there. It wasn't like that was my blinding ambition all the way through my 20s. If I had guessed, I might have guessed that I'd have worked for ESA instead, stayed in Europe and gone and worked on the European side. but the NASA position was advertised, and I applied for it. So I did end up working for NASA. Yeah, I'm slightly younger than you, but I do remember the Apollo missions. I remember them vividly. And at the time, I assumed we would go on as well. I actually thought that by the time I reached the age I am now, we would have a lot of people living and working in space. And I hoped that I might be one of them. I didn't see any reason why I shouldn't be one of them. If we had hundreds or thousands of people off planet, then maybe I could have been one of them. And I kind of resent the fact that I'm not an astronaut. I think it's kind of sad that we don't live in the world of the Vivian Carter novels, Hot Moon and all the rest, because I think that would be a much more, as you can tell from the Apollo Rising, the name of the series, Apollo Rising, that I think the books are basically optimistic, even though there's danger and intrigue and all of that. I think the books are ultimately optimistic about the human race and humans in space and all of that kind of stuff. And that is the present that I would very much like to be living in now.
Are you optimistic that we will get there just later than we thought? I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff happening in the space world right now with, private launch companies, and Artemis is coming along and all of that. What's your take on the current state of space?
I am very optimistic about that. I think Artemis 2 and 3 will probably go ahead. There's obviously a lot of political machinations around. There's a little bit of uncertainty, and every time there's an administration change, there's basically uncertainty at NASA, I would say. It's not actually that unusual. But yes, I believe the Artemis program will go ahead. And there's various other things going on with regard to the moon. The Chinese are very active with their robotic exploration of the moon, and they have a space station in orbit around the Earth. They're getting a lot of the experience that they would need for a lunar program. And like you say, there's the private companies as well. And private companies are already already interested in sending robots and rovers and things like that to the moon. There's a lot of capability that's being built up right now. So even aside from the NASA view, from NASA's lunar operations, that I think there are private companies that will make sure that we get to the moon again in my lifetime, and actually not very long from now. I think the late 2020s and early 2030s are going to be kind of really interesting times when it comes to returning to the moon and returning to that kind of exploration.
Why do you think it's important we go out there? I mean, obviously, I think it's important, but why do you think it's important?
I think humans need to explore. I think it's good to get off the planet. I think a lot of people will say things like the survival of the human race depends on us getting off the planet. I'm not sure I would necessarily go that far, but I think it would certainly help. When we're talking about colonies on Mars, those are actually very difficult things to do and very expensive things to do. So I think it would take us quite a long time to get to the point where we have a self-sustaining community off the Earth. But I do think it's important to explore. I think the science is very important. I think the sense of wonder involved in space travel and in various types of exploration is important. And I think it is how the species evolves, generally speaking, is to go outwards, to be looking over the next horizon, and to be inspired by that kind of thing.
One of the things I didn't ask about the series, and going back to For All Mankind and the Chris Hadfield books, because they're an alternate history, you often have real people in them, like, especially at NASA, names that people know, like Deke Slayton would have been around and people like that. Do you work real people into the story?
I do name drop a few people. Michael Collins is actually Vivian Carter's Capcom. He's the guy who's sitting in mission control. A lot of the astronauts did serve in mission control, in communications with the Apollo missions, and I have him as a Capcom in one area. I do refer to the real life moonwalkers because the Apollos were actually the same. The sequence of Apollos was the same in these books up to about Apollo 15, the exploratory Apollos, up to about Apollo 15. And the others, the timeline does vary a little bit at that point in the rearview mirror of what happens in the books, because they start in 1979. But yes, I do have real astronauts. I do have real people. I have real politicians. There are no scenes set on the Earth, but what's going on the Earth in the Cold War with Brezhnev and Reagan and all of that. So that there are references to the Earth politicians, and The history of the Cold War is moving a little differently on Earth, just as it is on the moon. So not everything is happening at the same time. The invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets happens a little earlier in these books. There are other things that are a little different, but the historical characters are kept real. All of the politicians are real. Many of the astronauts are real. I kind of shy away from putting words into the mouth of people who are still living, but yes, Neil and Buzz were the first people to land on the moon in these books as well, and there's various other people who are referred to by name.
So, in the final book, we didn't really talk about exactly what happens in the last book. What can you say about the last book without giving away too much?
Well, again, in the last book, I think we find out yeah, how much to give away in these things. I don't know. I guess if you picked up the books, you would probably read on the back of them, if people go and buy them from Asimov's, from Amazon. Sorry, they can try and buy them from Asimov's, but it won't work.
Probably wouldn't work.
People that go and buy the book or look at the back cover of the book will see that the technology has moved on a little, and that there's the opportunity now to do flybys of Venus and Mars, which they were actually planning to do with Apollo technologies. By the way, this was one of the Apollo applications, one of the applications of things they could do with Apollo technologies. As early as the 1960s, there was a Belcom study that was commissioned by NASA, looking at how they could do a flyby of Venus or a flyby of Mars. They were concentrating on Venus at that point because it's actually easier in some ways to do. And so they were looking at the technology that would be necessary to do that. And so we're at the point in book 3 where they do have the technology to do that. So that is a plot point in the third book. So there's part of that. And so that does take
the Cold War
away.
is still continuing.
The Cold War is still continuing. And in fact, things are getting, there are a lot of things that are actually getting worse. The political situation in Europe is getting very tense. In the real world, in our real 1985, that was a time of considerable Cold War tension. We had the downing of KAL-009, the Korean airliner, by the Soviets. We were actually closer to being in danger of nuclear war than a lot of people realize, unless they're students of that period. There was a big military maneuver that the Americans did, which actually freaked out the Russians, because they thought that the Americans were actually moving towards a first strike on the Soviet Union at the time. And this is all true. This is all real. There was a lot of concern. The Soviets were getting paranoid, but I think for justifiable reasons, that the Americans might launch a first strike on them. And so all of that is actually also happening in these books in a slightly different way. Things are evolving a little differently, but a lot of the same things. A lot of the same things are happening. It's a time of extreme tension on Earth. It's a time of extreme tension on the moon, and there's a lot of armed conflict, not nuclear conflict necessarily. There's a lot of armed conflict on the moon between astronauts and cosmonauts. Things really kind of erupt in the third book. Each book, things get slightly worse, of course, because it's a trilogy, and that's what happens. So by the time the third book comes around, you are seeing some quite serious conflicts. And some larger scale conflicts on the lunar surface and in orbit around the moon.
But presumably it doesn't end with nuclear holocaust on the Earth. So,
well, I did say that the books are meant to be optimistic. So.
That's what I was thinking. So. And so they're done. You don't think you'll write any more in this world?
I don't think I'll write any more book-length things in this world. I do have some short stories in mind that use some of the same characters at different times, or different characters in the same time. I think there is scope for other stories, and I might do that. I might try and write a story for Asimov's or somewhere else that does involve some of these characters, or some kind of prequel activity. Something like that. I do have a lot of knowledge of this world. I do have a kind of love for the technology, as must be apparent by now. So I might well return to the world at some point. I doubt it will be at book length, though.
So what are you working on now?
I'm working on a number of things right now. I have a story coming out fairly soon that's going to be a standalone, which is a little different from what's gone before in terms of, instead of alternate history, this is actually alternate zoology. It's in a series called Systema Paradoxa that comes out from eSpec Books. And they're books about cryptids, they're novellas about cryptids. And so I've written a cryptid book that will be coming out in May of next year. I'm not supposed to talk about it too much until it comes out. I don't want to get ahead of the publicity there, but that's something to look forward to. I'm allowed to refer to the fact that it exists. At book length, I'm actually working on something that's back in the ancient world again. And this is actually a project that I originally started at the same time as I started the Hot Moon books. And this is called Million Burning Scrolls. And it's based around the Library of Alexandria and Hypatia of Alexandria, who's a famous mathematician of the time. But this is in an alternate world, as you can guess. That's my thing now. This is an alternate world. Having done the series, the Clash of Eagles series, where the Roman Empire survives and is very much thriving, I decided to take the Romans out of the equation and have them beaten by the Carthaginians several hundred years ago at the time the books begin. And so the powerhouses in the Mediterranean are Carthage, Egypt, and Persia. And so we're in a very different Mediterranean, and it is, again, it's kind of political intrigue, it's action adventure, and it's starring Hypatia of Alexandria. This is going to be a trilogy. The books are going to be a little smaller because both the Clash of Eagles books and the Hot Moon books, they're sizable trilogies. They're about 500,000 words each. These are going to be a little shorter. I'm going to be writing at a more conventional length, so each book is going to be 90 to 100,000 words. And I have the first two books basically done, and I'm writing the third book now. And the reason I'm doing it this way is that I actually want them to appear closer together. From a marketing point of view, the Hot Moon books came out. One came out in 2022, one in 2024, and one in 2025, which is conventional. Books do generally come out with a large lag in between. But what I'd like to do with these books is have them come out like a couple of months apart, if I can swing this, so that people can binge the books, and so each book can get promo based on, can benefit from the promo from the book before, and so they come out very quickly. I haven't sold them yet. I'll probably go with an independent. I've spoken to them briefly with the Kasich people. I do have a relationship with Arc Manor Books and with Kasich, which is the imprint. They're the people that the Hot Moon books came out from. But nothing's written, nothing's inked yet. There's no contract yet. But yes, there are several indie publishers who I may well be pitching this to in the fullness of time once I'm happy with the books and I have them ready to go.
You know, the Apollo thing, you NASA scientist, and that makes an obvious connection. Why have you always had an interest in ancient history as well?
I have. I grew up in England, and there's a lot of Roman ruins there. I used to do a lot of family vacations traveling around England. We went to Hadrian's Wall a couple of times. I went to Bath with my family,
I was just
and
there.
then I traveled a lot as a student, and I traveled to Italy. I hitchhiked around Europe, and then I had a Eurail pass a couple of times, which enabled me to go on the trains for cheap as a student. And so I traveled around. I went and saw the Roman remains in Italy and various other places. So yes, and I took Latin at school, which at the time was actually rather unusual. One of my reasons for wanting to do Latin was that I mistakenly thought that I needed it to apply to Oxford, and this actually turned out that apparently you don't need to know Latin to go to Oxford as a physicist. I didn't know that, but I was also very interested in the language itself. So yeah, I'd always been interested in the ancient world and in movies and TV shows about it. And so yeah, that's another passion of mine, another area where I can dive deep into research for that. And ancient Egypt I was interested in as a kid as well. And in fact, it was only very recently that I finally got to Egypt. My wife and I went on a tour of Egypt and Jordan last year, and we did a Nile cruise as part of that. We went to all the famous places, Thebes and Luxor and the Aswan Dam and all of that. Cairo. So Valley of the Kings. So yes, I was always interested in Egypt, and so that's something that I don't have any difficulty persuading myself to read about. And I like the times. I like writing about the times. I probably wouldn't like it if I had to live there myself, but and Alexandria and ancient Egypt, they're kind of evocative places in my mind, and I like to write about those.
And where can people find you online to keep up with what you're doing?
Online, they can find me at www.alansmale.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm easily findable there, and I'm mostly on BlueSky these days. I do have a Twitter X account. Most of my stuff these days I am posting on BlueSky. So those are the main places. I do have an Instagram account that I should be using more than I am, but those are the main places right now.
Well, thanks so much for being on again, Alan, and congratulations on finishing the trilogy. Have you been pleased by the response?
I've been pleased by the response. I'm very pleased with the books themselves, and I'm pleased by the response. Being a person a publisher as well, you'll appreciate that I really appreciate books that are well produced, and these really are. And so I'm very happy with the production of the books. I've been very happy with the response to the books from readers. I was just at PhilCon, a science fiction convention in the Philadelphia region, and I had a lot of people who were interested in the books and were excited that the third book was coming out. There's a lot of people who are really into this. I do get a lot of nice responses on Facebook when I post about the books there. So yeah, I'm very happy, and a lot of my friends at NASA have read the books as well, and they've said nice things about them as well, because they're space geeks as well, and they're also people who would find issues if I'd screwed up, if I'd made a mess of something. They would be the first people to tell me. They seem happy with the realism of the books as well. So no, they're getting a great response. That makes me very cheerful. In a way, I'm almost sad that the writing has come to an end. It's kind of a bittersweet experience finishing a trilogy, and I've finished 2 now. And at one at the time I'm writing, I want to be done, and then when I'm done, there's this, oh boy, it's all done now kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the books are getting good press.
Well, that's great. And again, thanks so much for being on. And yeah, it's been great to talk to you again.
Well, thank you very much for having me on again, and allowing me to wax lyrical about Romans and Apollo astronauts and ancient Egyptians.
And thanks again to Alan for being on the podcast for a second time. It was fun to talk to him, and nice to see him face to face, because as I said, the last time we talked, it was just audio. So this was actually the first time we had what feels like a face-to-face conversation, even if we're not anywhere close to being in the same room. But that's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. Just the usual stuff at the end. You can find The Worldshapers at theworldshapers.com. You can find it on X at The Worldshapers. You can find it on Facebook at The Worldshapers. You can find me at edwardwillett.com. You can find me on X at ewillett. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor, and you can find me on YouTube, which you very well may have done if you're watching this, at Edward Willett. Edward.willett, or is it just Edward Willett? I think it's just Edward Willett on YouTube. And among other things there, you can walk with me around my home city, Regina. I live stream walks sometimes. It's been a bit less frequent recently because I broke my ankle in August, and so I'm still not fully as mobile as I would like to be, doing shorter walks and not as many of them, but I'm hoping to build that back up to something more like what I was doing before. Anyway, I'm still doing them, and you can still walk with me around Regina, Saskatchewan, if you would wish to do so. Finally, Shadowpaw Press can be found at shadowpawpress.com. You can also find it on X at Shadowpaw Press. You can find it on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. And I mentioned Endless Sky Books. It has its own website at endless-sky-books.com. But because it is distributed under the Shadowpaw Press umbrella, you can also find all those books on the Shadowpaw Press website as well. And everywhere fine books are sold. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you continue to come back as I continue to talk to authors about their latest books. That's it for this time. Bye for now.